Last week we began a new chapter on my journey to build the biggest wargaming board in YouTube history, a monster layout of the entire map of Middle-earth at 28mm scale. And we began work on the location that inspired me to play toy soldiers in the first place when I was 8 years old, the mighty Rohan fortress of Helms Deep.
So it begins.
In last week's video, we began here at the Deeping Wall, but today, we're not working on some tiny bit of stonework. We're diving into the monster main keep. By the end of today, I want the entire outer walls of Rohan's greatest fortress fully finished, from the causeway up through the gate and into the inner court. And with the new Rohan-themed edition of Lord of the Rings Warhammer not too far away, we need to get cracking to get the full fortress ready for the siege of Helm's Deep. So no mega meandering intro today, let's get straight to crafting and add Helm's Deep to the biggest wargaming board in YouTube history. Now this fortress isn't just going to be massive, but also insanely screen accurate. Last week we prepared a whole heap of digital files that were made by Wētā Workshop using the original filming Bigature for reference when they made their own Helms Deep collectible. I upscaled them and set up my own little print farm up in Wellington, and while I was working on the Deeping Wall, those printers were busy, and so my first job is to clean up a huge amount of prints of various chunks of the main fortress. So this is just like a massive 3D printed jigsaw puzzle. So I think the easiest step is to just start at the bottom and work our way up to the massive tower. So I grabbed the lower foundation of the main keep, which I had split in 3 pieces, and began to clean up the prints. Throughout this 3D printing journey, there is a fair bit more cleanup than you guys might be used to seeing, because as I upscaled the digital files from the collectible, often I would have to rebuild the mesh and block areas in with random rectangles, which then print as flash. With cleanup done, I grabbed a sheet of foam to be my baseboard and glued together these 3 lower wall pieces. I printed these lower walls as a really thin skin of stone to save on filament, but as we move to the upper half of the outer wall, our prints are about to get absolutely chonky. The upper wall is also in 3 chunks, the left side with the bastion and ramp behind it, the iconic center gate, and the right side with a nice section of ring wall with a full upper and lower floor behind it leading back towards the Rohan stables. To prevent the entire structure collapsing, once I'd gotten all our pieces lined up correctly, I reinforced our 6 pieces with a bunch of foam bracing and mounted the last half of our right upper wall, which mounted perfectly with a few supports cut to size to hold it up. Now I quickly realized I'd done a pretty dodgy job of cutting the files up in Blender, so I've got a few gaps to patch between the upper and lower layers, which I filled in with foam, and then grabbed some watertight epoxy putty and started sculpting a little bit of battlement detail where the Rohan stonemasons have done a pretty subpar repair job when some of the Númenórean stonework was destroyed in a previous battle. After shaping the cobblestone style repair work, I gave it some texture with scrunched up aluminium foil, and then it was time to jump around to the back of the gatehouse where some serious repairs are needed. As I chatted about in the last video, these incredible digital files are from Wētā Workshop and are just insanely screen accurate, designed by Leonard with the original filming Bigature as a reference, but they're of course optimized for the small scale diorama, and when these files get upscaled 5.7 times to Warhammer scale, I needed to do a fair bit of work in Blender to reinforce the mesh to get all of the stonework to stay supported. But here at the back of the gatehouse, I missed a few details, some archways that I forgot to support, which I re-sculpted with green stuff, and then a few bits of unsupported stonework, which I had to bulk out and replace with foam, including the main arch over the inner gate. I also had a big gap to fill on the front, where I had to fix another botched cut in Blender, but XPS foam packs this all out really nicely, and then after giving the foam components a quick prime by hand to protect it, I then primed the entire outer wall with automotive filler primer to give all my future layers of texture a really great surface to bond to, instead of that shiny FDM plastic. Just like the Deeping Wall, it's time to embrace our inner stonemason and get grouting. The grout lines on the Wētā Workshop collectible have to be over-exaggerated at such a small scale so that the detail will actually read, When these files are upscaled, the grout lines are way too deep, so I use polyfiller to grout every single print. This also helps hide a bunch of our layer lines and blend our various printed components together. The trick here is to make sure that I don't overgrout it and lose too much recessed detail, which is basically exactly what I did. So as it was drying, I grabbed a wooden skewer and started trying to carve back some of the grout. While the grout dried, I grabbed the pieces of the inner keep courtyard, cleaning them all up and gluing them together with liquid nails into a top and bottom half, and then grabbed all the various parts of our massive tower and picked out the lower foundation and cleaned it and glued it together before giving all of those pieces a blast with automotive primer. That lower tower foundation actually joins to the outer ring wall, so I put that into the main structure, built up on a bed of XPS foam sheet to get it the right height, and then supported it from behind with some more struts of foam. This piece now needs a bunch of grout work to get rid of those deep grooves and to blend it into the outer wall, and then our inner keep also needs a bit of grout treatment. The lower half was nice and simple, but before starting on the upper half, we've actually got some more complex sculpting and weathering to do. These digital files are sculpted with a bunch of unfinished details that Leonard will then complete in his physical detailing stage of the model, and we need to do the same. And if we look at the film footage, we can see there is just a heap of weathered stonework, particularly along the top of the inner battlement. We've got this great shot here of Theoden asking Aragorn if he knows where Gondor used to be.
Where was Gondor?
Which is amazing reference looking down this battlement, and so keeping that in mind, I started weathering all of the upper battlement with my snippers and a scalpel. A lot of carving and chipping and snipping, and that commander's overlook is coming along really nicely. But over next to the inner arch, I had to get a lot more aggressive, carving huge chunks out of the print with my snippers, which will need to be packed and then re-sculpted, so I jumped back to my polyfiller and packed all of that in with stone detail and grouted the upper inner battlement at the same time. By mounting up the polyfiller, I added even more of that kind of weathered stone look, and I then glued the inner keep together and left that all to cure. By this time, the outer keep was dry, and it's time for a final detail pass, brushing off all the loose filler, carving away the putty and the wrong spots, and then I still wasn't happy with these damn grout grooves, and now the putty was dry, it is just a nightmare to carve it all back.
There's gotta be a better way!
A massive shout out to my Patreons who bought me this lovely new rotary tool. I've been struggling to justify buying a new one as my old one is sitting in a storage unit in Australia, but I just can't see any time in the near future where we'll be able to afford to ship over all of the Zorpazorp stuff still back in Oz. So I have to have a new one. They're such weapons for sculpting. So thank you to my patrons, you incredible people. You're literally saving me hours of work. Look how easy this is. Not only is it way easier, it's also faster to clean up the grouting, and now I can add more little details to the fortress, which is exactly what this gorgeous Rohan fortress deserves. Next, we need to mount our upper keep into the outer wall, first by adding the second stage of the inner stairwell, and then I had a bunch of trimming that I needed to do. In Blender, a lot of the digital files actually overlap, because at the diorama scale, the whole fortress is printed in much larger chunks. But by exporting out the fortress in components like I did to be upscaled, some of the pieces need some convincing to sit together perfectly. Luckily, my multi-tool can be very persuasive. I ended up getting it almost perfect, gluing in the little bridge with a foam spacer to make it join nice and flush, and then I had a few bits of untextured plastic exposed where I couldn't 100% align the pieces, so I sculpted some new flagstones from a strip of XPS foam, and you know what? A little bit of extra room in this passageway behind the wall is going to be no bad thing when it comes to gameplay. The bridge itself needed some texturing. Again, this is a piece that Leonard textured after the printing process, so I've got to do the same. A few layers of thin XPS foam and some classic Zorpazorp foam carving, and I've got some flagstones that match the rest of the walls. I had to repeat this process on a bigger area in front of the inner keep archway, and then I got busy doing one final texture pass. Now I've got the Dremel to make sure every bit of grout was cleaned up and I wasn't losing any recessed detail, as well as adding a few bits of cracked stonework kind of detailing with the Dremel tip. Now, when making such massive scenery projects as Helms Deep, magnetizing components can be an absolute lifesaver. All of the massive towers, and especially this blown up section of the deeping wall, are prime candidates for magnetizing. I've been magnetizing different parts of a whole range of projects for years, from all the various weapon and equipment loadouts in our Dawn of War Warhammer series, all my Horus Heresy vehicles from tanks to titans, even destructible ruins on my Osgiliath megaboard. But for such a massive project as Helms Deep, we are going to need a lot of magnets.
So we got some help from today's sponsor, the almighty Magnet Baron, because magnets, they just solve everything.
If you need magnets for your wargaming, then look no further than the magnetbaron.com, your DIY super magnet home. Magnetbaron.com have a huge range of wargaming magnets which are super powerful and even have specific kits for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, magnetize movement trays, and magnetized collapsible flight stands for the epic travel wargaming experience.
I challenge you to find a better feeling in all of wargaming than the pure bliss of this moment. Magnetic perfection.
So to score some boss wargaming magnets for all your army needs, hit up the magnetbaron.com, link down in the description, so go and show him some love. Meanwhile, my mate Jimmy had popped over to give me a hand and started cleaning up the massive causeway print, which needed some trimming and a massive chunk of FTM supports cut off, which I forgot to remove in Blender before printing. And then once that was glued up, Jimmy jumped into preparing the top of the Hornberg Tower, which had just a little bit of stringing filament that he cleaned up with a lighter.
Just don't set it on fire like I did. Do you remember that in the Grey Havens video?
Do not wield open flames while watching the cricket. Firework done, Jimmy jumped into a massive grouting pass, which I was pretty bloody happy about because at this point I've done so much grouting, I've actually worn my fingerprints off my index finger on my right hand, and I now can't use biometrics to log into my phone. Yay! Although I'm sure, as many of you know the story about the Lord of the Rings chainmail makers at Wētā Workshop, this feels incredibly appropriate. I did realize, however, that we'd actually done all that grouting before the automotive primer. That's a bit of a whoops there. Luckily, the grout and the grooves should hold nicely, and these towers are so kind of nicely textured digitally, there's not much on the surface that's going to peel off. So I put the primer down, and then I glued the next section of the tower into the main board, and I can see you guys getting excited. You think that you're about to see the full tower up on the board, don't you? Well, not yet, my pretties. Patience, patience, my love. The top of the tower needs to be assembled with the upper ring glued onto the cap, and then the lower tower was blended into the main Hornberg outer wall with some light grouting, and then I also glued and grouted the upper cap to the central section of the tower.
Okay, so I need to be able to get in to the Hornberg Tower. Now I've sliced this here, and I was gonna leave this as like a removable section and magnetize the bottom, but I've just realized if we have a look on the collectible, cliffs and rock are actually built all the way up to about here, which means that if I want to get inside the tower for reasons, I need to pull that back apart. Brilliant.
So I cleaned all that glue back with some terps and a spatula before mounting the mouthpiece for the big Hornberg horn. Yes! Then we have a very important layer for the fortress, some Tamiya putty thinned with acetone to blend and retexture a whole heap of special spots all across the build. This putty is perfect for blending and hiding the joins between our various 3D prints, as well as building up texture in key areas, especially for areas that have like flat floor surfaces inside the gatehouse defenses, the stairs up to the hall and all the way back down to the gate. And then with all those print lines hidden, I also added a little bit of extra texture to our weathered stone, layering the putty on top and bulking out the filler. All of those little micro textures are just going to come up gorgeously when we get to painting. Then I grabbed some more Watertight and I went back to the Battlement detail as I just really wasn't happy with my first attempt and created something that worked a lot better. It's not kind of screen accurate perfect, but we've got a much better result now.
Just a quick shout out to my mate Con's new sort of like social networking app for finding other wargamers. yours. That's called VoxLink. All the links are down in the description. You guys have probably heard me talk about it before. It's awesome. So you want to find games, get on VoxLink. Go check it out.
Then while the green stuff was out, I resculpted the bottom of our massive horn tubes in the tower because I forgot to add supports when I printed them, and naturally they ended up with some pretty beat up end pieces, but they're looking nice now. Then after cleaning away any loose material and pre-priming our precious foam carved details, it is finally painting time. First, a massive prime with Rust-Oleum Grey primer, sadly inside my workshop because it was raining, which even with PPE was just an intense experience. After that dried completely overnight, I came back with light grey and began building up a mottled zenithal highlight, keeping it top down, but going for a really inconsistent application to start building up that kind of natural variation in colour that we need for aged stonework. When we painted the deeping wall, I did a big test run choosing some nice grey undertones and got stuck in applying those here through the airbrush, starting with a warm mid-tone, picking out random bricks, although I think I went a little heavier than I did with the deeping wall, but that will be fixable later. Next was a neutral dark grey. I actually used one a little darker this time by accident. I picked the wrong paint off the bottle and I ended up blending this back up, and it kind of worked even better. Then a cool highlight, again just going super random across all our bricks, both on the walls but also on the flagstones. We need a mottled kind of color tone there as well.
I also wanted to just show you guys a quick update on the Zorpazorp Patreon honor wall. I've just added in the new Minas Tirith section here. So in here we're going to have a whole extra shelf for our Megazorptron statues and some banners for the kind of Patreons who are a little more of the Middle Earth leaning. So that is coming along really nicely. I can now start adding in all of those Patreons for my Megazorptrons and banners and kind of decorative details to honor all of the amazing Patreons. You guys are the lifeblood of this channel. Thank you so much for supporting me and kind of keeping me going on this crazy crafting journey. If you would like your name on the Zorpazorp honor wall here in the studio, bang on here, up on a banner, or even a statue dedicated in your honor, go and check out the Patreon down in the description. It's an amazing way to support the channel, and it just keeps the lights on, it keeps the bills paid, and it keeps all the materials stocked in the workshop. It makes everything happen. So shout out to the Patreons.
Now, as these airbrush base tones were a little more opaque and saturated than on the deeping wall, I had to go a little heavier with my overbrushing to blend these back into our grey stone. For those of you who missed the part 1, this helps kind of blend these undertones into the main wall, and by keeping the overbrush mostly in a downward direction, it gives the new coloured blocks the same highlight profile that matches the zenithal grey, which really maximizes our realism. Light matters, folks. Then after letting all of that fully dry, it is time for our huge black wash, just slathered all over the entire piece. I get so many questions about this wash. It's literally just black ink diluted in water with a little bit of rinse aid to help it flow into the recessed details. The key though is getting the concentration right, which basically just takes a bit of experimenting.
I mean, yeah, this is Helms Deep. Look at it, it's here in my workshop. It's not finished obviously, but it is coming together. The next big stages of the project are obviously the upper hall up here, which sweeps down to the stables where I am and just cliff everywhere, up, around, down to the deeping wall, down past the causeway. There's a lot to do, but this is looking so good. But before we wrap up today, there's one really special thing I want to do.
We cannot end this video until we've done one very important task. I grabbed 2 more trestle tables. Yes, this build is already spanning 3 damn tables, and slapped down the causeway and the deeping wall, and then it was finally time to install the tower at its full height. Plus, I put a little something special inside. We all know King Theoden loves a good rave. So here we have Helms Deep so far, decked out with a handful of Rohan models to give you guys a sense of scale, although I think we can all agree I'm going to need a lot more if I'm going to have enough men to man the Burg and the deeping wall. A huge shout out to the folks at Wētā Workshop for making this all possible. Leonard, Caitlin, Jules, you guys are amazing. I've got the link to the Wētā Workshop web store down in the description. They have an amazing range of Middle-earth and Warhammer collectibles which are just absolute works of art and would look amazing in your hobby room. Don't forget to check out the epic new Middle-earth releases from Metalbird, link down below. Every single week from now until Christmas, I have brand new Middle-earth videos dropping right here on Zorpazorp. The next 2 months are gonna be bigger than the Osgiliath explosion of 2022. So come on this journey with me. Like, subscribe, throw me a comment, join the Patreon if you can, and let's build Middle-earth together.